So if, like me, you absolutely loved the Lancool 217 but hated the wooden paneling on it, you're going to enjoy this build guide, because I've now got the Infinity version. So gone is the wood effect, and we've now got Infinity mirrors on the front with cutouts for RGB fans. So let's dive in and see what Lian Li have done with this case. So a lot of this case is still the same as the original Lancool 217. So our tempered glass panel can simply be popped out from the top and then lifted up and away. We've got a mesh panel at the bottom to provide airflow for any fans we want to mount at the bottom. There's a captive thumb screw at the back we need to loosen, and then we can pull the panel backwards, tilt out and lift away. And again, our other side panel, exactly the same as the original. Mesh cut out to the bottom again to act as a source of airflow for any fans mounted at the bottom of the case. And we simply pop the panel out from the top and then lift up and away. So now we come on to what is new, and gone is the wooden accents on the front panel, and we've got this absolutely gorgeous Infinity mirror, which is going to have ARGB lighting effects on it. In the middle of the Infinity mirror we've got two cutouts, and we've got mesh sections here, and behind these we've got two 170mm ARGB fans. So these mesh panels are removable for cleaning. You simply need to rotate them anti-clockwise, and then the easiest thing is just to pop a finger in past the fan to push them out. So with it removed, you can see the 170mm fans at the front. They've also got their own Infinity mirror in them, and you are going to be able to control the lighting effects on the fans and also the Infinity mirrors separately. So how you're going to do that is with these two buttons either side of our power button on the top of the case. So the M1 button you're going to simply press to cycle through the ARGB lighting effects on the Infinity mirror. And again, it's a simple press of the M2 button to cycle through the ARGB lighting effects of our three pre-installed ARGB fans. It's a long hold for 2 seconds of the M1 button to sync up the lighting effects with Lian Li's L Connect, whereas it's a long hold of the M2 button to sync up with motherboard control. Whereas if you hold both the buttons in for 2 seconds, it's going to turn all the lighting off. So the reason this works is all our case fans and also the Infinity mirror lighting effects are all connected up to this hub at the top of the case. So we've got our three case fans connected up here, and we've also got the Infinity mirror lighting effects connected up here. And this can communicate wirelessly with one of Lian Li's wireless controllers that you plug into a USB port, and that's how it connects up to Lian Li's L Connect. Important thing to remember, don't forget to plug the SATA cable into a cable coming from your power supply, or your fans and lighting effects aren't going to work. And we've also got a PWM and ARGB cable allowing the motherboard control option. So the original Lancool 217 had two power buttons, one down here and one on the top. That is now gone. We still have a single USB Type-C, two USB Type-A ports and a combined headphone and microphone jack, but you are now able to move the I/O up to the top of the case. So it's here at the top that you're going to be able to move the I/O module to. So you can simply get your hand in here and pop this plastic panel out. We're going to need to remove our front panel later on, so I'm just going to simply pop our top panel off, and then I'm just going to free up all our cables. It is possible to pop our front panel off, we just simply need to push it forward. But you are going to need to be careful because it's still connected up with cables at the top. So you can see our I/O module is held in place with two screws, and with the screws removed we can simply pop it off, and then all we're going to need to do is pull the cables through. So this is obviously going to leave a gap, so in the case accessory box we get this little panel. So we'll just line it up with the cutouts, and then we'll replace the original screws. So that's what it looks like with the front panel back in place. Up top we can pass our I/O cables through the cutout and bring our panel down into place. We'll just lower it in and then push down, and we'll secure it into place with two screws from the case accessory box. And then replacing our top panel, you can see what the I/O module is going to look like installed at the top. Fan and radiator support is exactly the same at the top of the case, up to three 120 or two 140mm fans. And if you want to go with a radiator, you can fit a 360mm radiator up to a maximum thickness of 83mm for your fans and radiator. And if you want to go with a 280, thickness is a little bit less at 60mm. And our top fan stroke radiator bracket is held on with two screws at the side, and once they've been removed, the bracket can be tilted up and lifted away. At the rear of the case, we've got a 140mm ARGB fan pre-installed, and again we've got a nice Infinity mirror in the middle matching the fans on the front. It is possible to mount a 120mm fan here. So this brings us on to the last major difference between this case and the original Lancool 217. and that is that we don't have any pre-installed fans at the bottom of this case. If you do want to install fans at the bottom, it's just a simple matter of removing the screws at the front, and then you're simply going to be able to tilt the panels up and lift them out. And at the bottom you can fit up to 3 120mm fans. So I've done everything that I need to do with the case for this particular build guide, but it is important to say the rest of this case is exactly the same as the original Lancool 217. And in that build guide I spent about another 15 minutes talking through all the different features of that case. But what I'm going to do is put that footage on now to show you all the additional case features. You're just going to simply have to ignore the wooden paneling and the pre-installed non-ARGB fans. So there's no point me re-recording what I've already done. So if you're not interested in any of this, go ahead and use the timestamps to skip to the next section. So in terms of the rubber pads, in the case you get two different sizes. The big ones are for mounting fans, and the small ones are for mounting drives. And there's 4 different sizes of these hard drive screws that you're going to use to secure the fans to the rubber mounts. Now there's 2 smaller sizes and they're for drives, one for 2.5 inch and one for 3.5 inch, but it's these larger ones that you're going to use for the fans. So you'll notice these screws are of different lengths, and it depends what sort of fans you're going to want to mount at the bottom. If you're going with standard 25mm fans, it's these shorter screws that you're going to use to mount them. If you're using Lian Li Uni fans, which are slightly thicker, 28mm thick, it's these larger screws that you're going to want to use. So I'll show you with Lian Li Uni fans. So we can set a rubber mount onto each corner, and the little thin side, which is going to secure into the case, is sitting up the way. So we'll pop it down through the rubber pad and we can secure them into place. Then you're just going to be able to line your fan up with the brackets. It's going to push down through the holes, and then you just need to pull it forward to get it to lock into place. So you can see the Lian Li Uni fans are slightly thicker than these standard fans, and it wouldn't make a lot of sense to add just one single fan into place at the bottom. And Lian Li do include enough of these longer screws. If you wanted to add 3 Uni fans at the bottom, you could do this. Motherboard support in this case is absolutely massive, and you can actually fit server motherboards up to a maximum width of 330mm. In terms of more standard motherboard mounting options, if you want to go with an ATX motherboard, you can see we've got additional cutouts for back connector motherboards. And again, with micro ATX, we've got additional cutouts for back connector motherboards as well. If you want to go with an air cooler, the maximum height supported is up to 180mm. So if you want to go with any motherboard larger than ATX, you are going to have to modify this I/O bracket. So the I/O bracket is held on with 3 screws, and then with the 3 screws removed, we can simply tilt the bracket out and remove it from the case. Now, what you'll notice is this rubber grommet is closer to this side of the bracket, but if we were to rotate the bracket round, this rubber grommet is then going to be further towards the front of the case, making space for an ATX motherboard. The only problem with turning this round is our GPU support bracket is now reversed. So to remove the GPU support bracket, it's held on with 4 screws at the back. We can then move the GPU support bracket round to this side and again secure it in from the back. So then we can slide the bracket back into place and we'll secure it with the 3 screws. So what you'll notice now, the GPU support bracket and also this rubber grommet have moved further towards the front of the case. So we take a look at our last lot of standoffs. You're going to have additional space over here for eATX motherboards up to a maximum width of 280mm. If you do want to go with a larger motherboard, you're just going to have to remove this panel. And with the panel removed, you can now accommodate motherboards up to a maximum width of 330mm, and you're still going to have this additional row of rubber grommets to pass all your cables through to the back. At the rear of the case, we've got 7 horizontal PCI expansion slot brackets, and in terms of graphics card support, the maximum length supported is up to 380mm. To use the GPU support bracket, there's a thumb screw at the back you're going to need to loosen, and then you're going to be able to slide the GPU support bracket up to where it supports your graphics card, and then all you need to do is tighten the thumb screw at the back to secure it. If you're interested in mounting your graphics card vertically, you'll be pleased to hear this bracket is rotatable. It's held on with 4 screws. Then with the 4 screws removed, you are able to rotate the bracket around 90 degrees and re-secure it with the 4 screws. And you can see all the slots are now vertical, and great to see they're going to be well away from the tempered glass panel. So taking a look at the bottom of where these slots come out to, your only issue is going to be that you're not going to be able to have these fans installed here with your graphics card mounted vertically, but Lian Li have a solution for this. And that is that it is possible to move these fans from the top of the bracket and mount them underneath. So I have freed our fan cables up at the back, so to remove the fans, all we need to do is push them backwards and remove them. So as well as moving our fans to the bottom, we're also going to need to move them closer to the front to make space for our riser cable at the rear of the case. So all we need to do is insert this little bracket that comes in the case accessory box, lower it down, and we'll secure in place with one of the screws with the rounded head. So all we're going to need to do is move the mounting brackets to the other side of the fans. We can then turn our fans around and fix the brackets to the other side. So then we can just bring the fans in from the underside. We'll line the rubber mounts up with the holes and push them into place. And then same thing with our second fan. And then we get another panel in the case accessory box, which can simply slot into place. And again, we'll secure it with one of the screws with the rounded head. So you'll notice our additional panel has 2 screw holes in it, and we also have 2 screw holes on the original panel. And these are for mounting the standoffs for securing your riser cables. There's 2 different positions you're going to have the riser cable in. So all you're going to do is take the long standoffs that come in the case accessory box, pick the position you want to put them in, and screw them into place. And in the case accessory box, we do get the standoff insertion and removal tool, which can go over the top and help you insert them. So if you wanted to go with a vertical GPU, the only additional thing you're going to need to pick up is a riser cable. You're going to secure it to the 2 standoffs using the screw with a little lip around the outside, and that's the same screw you're going to use to secure your motherboard to the case. So although the fans look really clean recessed at the bottom of the case, there is a reason that Lian Li have installed them at the top, and that is because there is 2 major limitations of mounting the fans down like this. The first is with the fans extending down into this compartment at the bottom, you're not going to be able to use the hard drive cages that come in the case accessory box. I'll show you these later on. And the second thing is, because the fans extend all the way over to here, you're not going to be able to mount your power supply in the traditional position with the plug cable going into the back of the case, and you're going to have to use the side mount that Lian Li have here. So this brings us on to our power supply, and there's 2 different orientations that you can install your power supply in. So out of the box, Lian Li are wanting you to install it sideways on, and they include this power extension cable, which you can simply plug into your power supply. And then the little mesh panel is going to cover this over. So we take a look in from the other side of the case, you can see the reason why Lian Li are doing this. You're going to have easy access to all the ports in your power supply for plugging cables into it. And in this orientation, the maximum length of power supply supported is up to 180 millimeters. It is also impossible to install your power supply in the standard orientation, and to do this you're going to need to remove this plate at the back. It's held on with 4 screws. You can then move the plate from the back to the side of the case and secure it with the 4 screws. And you'll see in this position you're then able to screw your power supply straight in from the back and plug your power cable directly into the power supply without needing to use this extension cable. So the advantages of doing this is you are able to install longer power supplies. In this position you can install power supplies up to a maximum length of 220 millimeters. Although there's a few downsides. The first is it's not going to be as easy to plug your cables in. You might say that's not such a big deal, but there is a couple of other problems. The first is you're only going to be able to install 1 hard drive cage at the bottom instead of 2. And if you want to go with your graphics card vertically, you're not going to be able to move the fans down to the bottom compartment with the power supply installed at the back. We've got a dust filter over our power supply's intake, and it can simply be pulled out from the back for cleaning. The other thing you're going to notice is that apart from where our power supply is going to go, the bottom of the case is pretty much solid. We've just got these cutouts for mounting our drive trays at the bottom. So that's the reason why we've got 2 perforated areas at the bottom on the side to give our bottom mounted fans a source of air intake. Taking a look at the other side of the case, cable management looks like it should be pretty good. We've got these rows of Velcro cable straps for helping manage our cables, and at the rear of the case we've got these little plastic clips which we can keep our cables behind. We've got 2 dedicated 2.5-inch drive mounting brackets behind the motherboard. To remove the drive brackets, there's a thumb screw at the top you're going to need to remove, and the bracket can be tilted out and lifted up and away. You're going to set your 2.5-inch drive into place, and you're going to secure it with 4 of the screws with a little lip around the outside. And then you're going to turn the bracket to the case and secure it using the thumb screw. It is also possible to mount a drive in the main body of the case. You're just going to need to remove this additional panel at the bottom, and then you're going to take the smaller rubber pads and push them through the holes. You can set your 2.5-inch drive into place with the I/O facing towards the back, and then you're going to use the 2.5-inch drive screws to secure it into place. And that's what it's going to look like with the drive installed in the main body of the case. So in terms of drive mounting, the only modification that Lian Li have done with this new version of the case compared to the original is we've now got thumb screws installed at the bottom securing our drive trays in place. So you are going to need to remove these thumb screws before you're going to be able to remove the drive trays. We got 2 of these hard drive cages. Inside we get 1 drive tray which can simply be pulled out from the front. So this drive tray will accommodate both a 2.5-inch and 3.5-inch drive. So we're going to mount the 2.5-inch drive on the underside of the drive tray. So we turn it over and we'll set our 2.5-inch drive into place. And we're going to secure it with 4 of the screws with a little lip around the outside. You'll notice the screw holes at the bottom are recessed. They're not going to get in the way of our 3.5-inch drive mounting. And we've got little pins on the side which is going to secure our 3.5-inch drive. So it's just a matter of lining the drive up with the pins and just pushing it down into place to secure it in the drive tray. We can then secure our drive in the drive tray, and you'll notice then on the top of the drive tray we have mounting for either a 3.5-inch, these outer holes, or a 2.5-inch drive. So what you're going to do is secure the correct drive screws and rubber pads to the bottom of your drive. We can line it up with the right holes in the top of the hard drive cage and then push it into place to secure our drive. So in each of these drive trays you're going to be able to fit a 3.5-inch and 2.5-inch drive in the drive tray, and on top it's either a 2.5-inch or 3.5-inch drive. So when it comes to securing our drives at the bottom, we have a range of different slots for securing the drive trays. For 2 drive trays, you're going to install it all the way towards the front. Just a matter of lining the drive tray up with the cutouts beneath, and then you're going to push it forward, and it's going to lock into place. To remove it, you simply lift this lever up and pull forward, and that's going to let you take it out again. And then we'll set our second drive tray into place. And if you're only wanting to go with 1 drive cage, and remember if you are installing your power supply in the standard orientation, you're only going to be able to fit 1 drive cage in place because the cables are going to be coming out here. You can have it all the way to the front or 1 slot back. To open our socket cover, we're going to push our lever down and out. We'll bring it all the way to the middle of the motherboard, and then we can open the socket cover up. Holding our CPU by the edges and making sure we've got the text the correct way up, we're going to lower it carefully down into the socket. And once we're happy it's sitting correctly, we can go ahead and close the socket cover down. We can then close the lever, and as we do, the black bit of plastic should pop off, and we'll put it into our motherboard box for safekeeping. To remove our M.2 SSD heatsink, we need to push this lever up. We can then lift the heatsink up and lift it away. We need to remember to remove the plastic protection from the heatsink and also the heat pad on the motherboard. We can then insert our M.2 SSD into the slot, and as we flatten it down we can just open this little clip and it's going to hold it in place, and then we can replace the heatsink. We're going to be installing our RAM in the 2nd and 4th slot along from the CPU, so we'll go ahead and open the clips on these slots. Then we just need to line the RAM up with the slot. Once we're happy everything's lined up, it's just some firm pressure and it's going to clip into place. Then it's the same thing with our second stick. The first step in installing our CPU cooler is to remove the stock clips. They're each held on with 2 screws. Then we can take the bag of standoffs labelled AMD and we're going to screw one of these onto each corner. Next we can insert the motherboard into the case, line it up with the standoffs at the back. And you'll notice that once the middle standoff goes through the middle hole, it's going to help hold our motherboard in place. We'll then secure the motherboard to the case using 9 of the screws with a little lip around the outside. Next we've got our case cables to plug in. Our HD audio cable is going to go into this header on the bottom left hand side of the motherboard. So we can go ahead and bring the cable through the cutout, and we're going to plug it in with the HD audio text facing down the way. Next we've got 2 ARGB headers, so I'm going to bring the ARGB cable coming from our hub through and we'll get it plugged in. Then we've got 2 system fan headers in the middle, so we'll bring the PWM cable coming from our fan hub through and get it plugged in. Our front panel connectors are going to go into this header on the bottom right hand side of the motherboard, and it's the pins over to the left hand side that we're going to plug it into. So we'll bring the cable through the cutout and we're going to plug it in with the front panel text facing up the way. Our USB 3.0 cable is going to go into this header here. The only problem, if we bring it straight through here, the GPU support bracket is going to catch on it. So I'm just going to loosen the thumb screw at the back of the GPU support bracket. I'll temporarily bring it all the way up to the top. That's then going to allow me to bring the USB 3.0 cable through. We'll get it lined up and push into place. And then I can lower the GPU support bracket back down again. Last case cable is our front panel Type C header. So we'll bring the cable through, line it up and push into place. We're now ready to install our power supply, and I'm using one of Lian Li's power supplies with integrated cable management. So I've set it into the orientation that we're going to be installing it in the case, with our I/O coming out the side, and these are all our cables that are already plugged in. Now I haven't managed our 2 EPS cables because they're going to be running straight up like this, but all our other cables are going to be routing this way, so I've managed them with these 2 Velcro cable straps. Then we turn things around, so we've got more cable management on the side of the power supply, and this is where I've routed one of our cables that we're not going to use. So we've got a standard PCIe cable, which we're not going to need because our graphics card uses 12 volt 2x6 cable. So I've simply bunched it up here and covered it with a cable ties. Now I have plugged in one additional cable, which is a SATA cable. And because our connector is long enough to reach to it, I've simply routed the SATA cable in at the side, and we're going to be able to plug into this connector here. The SATA cable is the only cable that doesn't come plugged in, but you can see we've got a standard adapter here, which I've simply plugged the SATA cable into. So we go ahead and set our power supply into place with the fan facing down the way. And we'll secure our power supply into place with 4 of the large power supply screws from the case accessory box. We can then bring our power supply cable extension through and we'll get it plugged into the power supply. And then we'll just tuck it down out of the way. And very important, in any build where you're using a power supply cable extension, you're going to want to turn your power supply on. And then at this stage we can replace our mesh panel. We've got both an 8 and 4 pin EPS power connector at the top left of the motherboard. So we can go ahead and bring the cables in through the cutout. The 8 pin connector will split into 2, so we can plug one of those cables in, and we'll also plug in our 8 pin connector. And then we'll just push all the excess cable through to the back. Our 24 pin cable is going to go into this header here, so we'll go ahead and get things lined up and push into place. And then we've got the SATA cable coming in from our fan hub to plug into our power supply. We're now ready to start work on our I/O, and it's great to see that our fans are pre-installed on our radiator. The only thing we're going to have to do is plug the included cable into them. So we've got a little connector on this end, just simply line it up and push into place. In terms of our pump, all we're going to have to do is take our AMD bracket and slide it into place. And then we need to remember to remove the plastic protection. We can then set our top fan stroke radiator bracket into place. So it does look like it's going to be quite difficult to get all the screw holes lined up with the bracket. So that shouldn't be a big problem. I'm just going to leave 2 of the screw holes out and it will still be well secured. So I'm just going to set our CPU cooler into place loosely at the top. And the reason for doing this, if I go ahead and secure everything down, it's going to make us harder to see the headers at the top of the motherboard. So I'm going to take the cables coming from our fans and pass them through this cutout to the back. So this grey connector at the top of the motherboard is our CPU fan header. So I'm going to bring the PWM cable back through and we'll get it plugged into here. We've also got an ARGB header here at the top, so we'll bring the ARGB cable through and we'll get it plugged in. So now we've got the cables plugged in, we can install the radiator bracket at the top. And at this stage we can replace our top panel. We can then add some thermal paste to the centre of the CPU. Next we can line our CPU cooler up with the bracket beneath, and then we're going to want to put a thumb screw onto each corner. And then we just tighten each corner up in turn. And then I'm just going to pass the cables coming from the pump through to the back. So our system information is going to be displayed here and we want to check it's the right way up. So we can remove the mirror cover, it simply pulls off. And then if we have a look here, you'll see our information is going to be on its side. So this simply pulls out and you'll see we've got gold pins here, but we've got multiple contacts. So we can just turn it round to where it's straight and then replace the mirror. And we'll remove the plastic protection. We've got 2 USB 2.0 headers at the bottom of the motherboard, so I'm going to bring the USB cable coming from our pump back through and we'll get it plugged in. Last thing for us to do is take the PWM cable coming from our pump and plug it into that splitter cable that we've already plugged into our CPU fan header. We're now ready to install our graphics card and we're going to need to remove the first, second and third expansion slot covers from the top. To open the clip in our top PCIe slot, we just need to push the button on the motherboard. And then we can line our graphics card up with a slot. Once we're happy everything's lined up, it's just some firm pressure and it's going to clip into place. And then we'll secure it with the 3 screws. Next I'm going to slide our GPU support bracket up to where I'm happy it's supporting our graphics card. And then we just need to tighten the thumb screw at the back to hold it in place. Anytime you use a GPU support bracket, you're going to want to check that it's not catching on the GPU fan. So we spin the fans. You can see that the fan is actually catching on the bracket. So if we left it in this position, there is a risk of our graphics card fan becoming damaged. So a good way to fix this is to add more padding to our GPU support bracket, and we're going to want to add it right out towards the motherboard end of the bracket. That way it's going to be putting pressure on the plastic bit of the graphics card and keeping this bit at the end away from our fan. So I've got a double-sided adhesive pad. I'm going to leave the plastic protection on one side. And like I said, I'm just going to put this as far towards this end of the graphics card as I can. Okay, so we'll check that again with the little pad in. Our GPU fan can spin completely freely. We can then bring our 12 volt 2x6 cable through the cutout at the bottom, and we'll get it plugged into our graphics card. Okay, last thing to do is some cable management and get the panels back on again. So I've gone ahead and got the PC set up off camera. If you don't know how to do that, I've made a guide to setting your PC up after you've built it, and you'll find a link to that video in the description. In terms of our temperatures, our Ryzen 7 9700X idled at 41 degrees and reached a maximum of 64 degrees during a 10-minute idle 64 stability test. The Aorus Master 5070 Ti idled at 28 degrees and reached a maximum of 59 degrees during the stability test. In terms of noise, we had average noise levels of 37 decibels at idle and 46 decibels under load. So I did have some issues with the information being displayed on our CPU cooler screen. So it uses Enermax tuner software to communicate with the PC, and it can display CPU, GPU and revs per minute. So I had no issues at all with the CPU temperature. It was displaying accurately, but the GPU temperature it displays is actually the internal graphics rather than the dedicated card, and there was no way to adjust this. And in terms of the revs per minute, this was all over the place. Sometimes it was displaying 0, other times it was displaying as high as 8,000, and it wasn't reflective at all about what our fans on the radiator were actually doing. So hopefully this will be something Enermax will fix with a software update, but if you are thinking of getting the CPU cooler at the moment, the only thing that's really displaying accurately is the CPU temperature. So the case is going to come in both black and white. The black version that I've got here will cost you just under $125 US, and it's an extra $5 for the white version. So I'm not planning on doing a separate review for this case. I've already done a detailed review of the Lancool 217, and you'll find a link to that video in the description. And like I say, this is the same case from the front panel back, and my main issues with the Lancool 217 were the front panel. I hated the wooden effects on it, and I really wish Lian Li would have just made a version with a black front panel. And they've gone one better. They've added infinity mirrors and some really cool ARGB fans at the front. So this case is absolutely brilliant. And having reviewed a lot of overpriced cases on the channel recently, for $125 US, this case offers incredible value for money. So if you can find it in stock at that price, go out and get it, because it's an absolutely brilliant case. So hopefully you have enjoyed this full step-by-step PC build guide. If you have, please remember to give it a thumbs up. And if you're not currently subscribed to the channel, please hit the subscribe button as well.